Is social media really worth it? Scene one, take one.
So guys, I am really here. Whilst this is recorded, I'm actually in the chat right now. So please do feel free to comment, drop questions in, and I'd love to kind of interact with you. How's the sound? Check. Social media, is it really worth it? Yeah?
Why don't you just start by telling us something about yourself?
Cool. So I'm Ant. I'm Managing Director of Sleeping Giant Media. I'm also a professor at Giant Campus, where we get to share knowledge and skills with people who want to learn all things about digital marketing, which is very exciting.
That's great. And you've come here to answer a question. It's, social media, is it really worth it? What do you think?
I'm going instantly to repeat the question back to you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. That's a good question. Social media, is it really worth it? I'd love to talk to you about that subject, but I can answer the question right now. The answer is no. And that's it. So thank you for being here. Thanks for the time. And I think that's it. That's a wrap. Are we good?
We're good.
We're good. Okay, nice. No, I'm just kidding. Social media, absolutely, I think it's worth it. But if done right, and I think that sounds like a really obvious thing to say, if done right, but I think it matters more now than kind of it ever has done. We've been saying this for a long time as an agency, as a brand, that, as users, we no longer go online to fulfill a need, to complete an action, to buy something. We kind of live our lives. We're always connected. Gone are the days where we would all be sat as a family around a TV screen from 7 till 8 before we kind of went to bed. In those days, advertisers had not massive reach, but they had lots of attention. The world we live in now, we're always connected. We live in a multi-device world, and we're constantly being bombarded as users with kind of messages, with communications, with content. And what's happened over the years is we've become very, very good at ignoring the stuff that we don't want any part of, ignoring the stuff that we're not interested in. We've become really good at kind of isolating the brands and the messages that we think are really important to us and cutting the rest out. So that concept of kind of living online rather than going online to kind of fulfill a need or a desire is a really important one. That means that as advertisers and marketers, we really have to think carefully about what does doing it right actually mean, because we have massive reach and a huge potential audience, but we don't have the attention that we once had. So we really have to work hard to make it stand out. So when thinking about the question, social media, is it really worth it? There's 3 key things that kind of I came up with that I think are really important to help answer that question. You need to break it down into 3 parts. The first part is about measurement. To manage anything, you need to measure it, and we need to kind of address that first. The second point, which is often overlooked, is about understanding your channel and the role it plays. And we always, as marketers, talk about audience, and understanding your audience and your potential customer base is absolutely key. But often we overlook the channel and the role it should play in any marketing activity. So we need to talk about that secondly. And then thirdly, we need to talk about the fact that whilst I'm here to talk about social media, I'd also like to talk about the concept that no channel is fully effective in isolation. And actually it's about making all of your channels work well together to get the best outcome. But let's start at the beginning. Let's go to the first point, and let's kick off with discussing how to manage. You first kind of need to measure. So I guess the question stands is kind of how do we know what good looks like? In order to understand if anything's kind of worth it, we need to answer that question: what does kind of good look like? To do that, we need some form of measurement structure. Now that can come in the form of a regular report, a weekly report, a monthly report. It could be kind of on paper, maybe digitally. It could be kind of visual, graphically. It could be sent via email. But typically there needs to be kind of a framework of metrics you're going to kind of look at on a regular basis to understand if your performance is moving forwards or backwards. And there are lots of things you could be using. From the various social channels, you could be looking at kind of reach, likes, follows, interactions, engagements. We could be using your CRM system to look at joining the dots, looking at how people have interacted with your brand once they've kind of interacted on social media and then visited the site. And with that in mind, we could also and should be using tools like Google Analytics to kind of understand what happens next. Where are users kind of navigating? Are they downloading things from your website? Are they kind of firing off kind of forms? Are they spending a lot of time on site, or are they bouncing straight away because they haven't perhaps got what they wanted? There's lots of metrics out there that we could and should be using. The challenge, of course, is there are so many. Challenge of where do we start? What should we be tracking? And it still brings us back to that first question. What does success actually look like? Because the challenge is if we measure too much, nothing really has value. So let's move on to the second point that I want to cover off, and that's the point about understanding your channel being just as important as understanding your audience. So I'd like you to consider the question, why are you here today? And by here, it might look like I'm in a kind of studio setup. I'm actually in the chat along with you, so I can definitely respond to any comments. But I'd like you to think about why you're involved in this B2B event, albeit a virtual version of what was originally meant to be in the kind of real world. What's the reason that you've come along today? Have you come along to this event to find a supplier, commit to some sort of contract, and sign on the dotted line here and there? Because trust me, we can do that virtually. If there's an opportunity to do so, we can definitely make that happen. Are you really here to kind of purchase, spend money? Or did you come along today to kind of be inspired, to get new ideas, and maybe start a relationship that might turn into a partnership kind of longer term? Now, as much as I would like it to be the first thing, the reality is, any one of us would be here attending an event like this to be inspired, to get ideas, to maybe start a relationship that could very well develop into something in the future. And I think we would all understand that. So if I was to say to the team that are running this event that your goal to make this event successful is to come away from this event with 10 new clients signed, maybe deposits paid, and kind of money on the table. Now, the reality is that is unlikely to kind of generate a successful outcome. We wouldn't look at this event if that was the success criteria and say, yep, it was a successful B2B event. Realistically, the goals for us kind of here today will be to start new relationships, hopefully inspire some people to take action. Our mission as a business is to awaken potential. And if we can help unlock some of that potential within our audience, that will absolutely feel like a goal. And of course, as part of our longer term marketing plan and ambitions would be to start some relationships that might turn into a longer term partnership with one of our brands, i.e. Sleeping Giant Media. So that would kind of make sense. I think you can all agree that seems pretty logical for this event. The challenge is that many of us look at our different marketing channels and we think about the end goal when it comes to understanding what good looks like. We only think about the bottom of the funnel. What I'd kind of like to talk about now is very much that funnel, the kind of consumer buying journey that actually I think works in B2B very well as it does in B2C environment. In that funnel, I suspect you're all aware of, sits with kind of awareness at the top, moving people through the funnel into consideration, thinking about kind of who they kind of might want to work with, asking some questions, moving them on to kind of purchase, that kind of do phase, that point where you're looking for someone to take action, make a commitment, buy a product, commit to a service. And then ideally trying to turn those people as part of the loyalty phase of that journey kind of into advocates, of your brand. Now, if you think about that funnel for a second, the journey that we all go on at some point, starting at the top where it's all about brand awareness and trying to kind of introduce your brand to a new audience. If we were to take that and kind of like turn it on its side and lay out a whole load of different channels, all the different channels we could be using, we can start to sit there and think, well, where does each kind of channel sit on that kind of journey to kind of purchase and eventually kind of loyalty and advocacy? And I think social media predominantly sits towards the kind of top to mid of the funnel. It's all about building kind of new audiences and then building confidence with those new audiences and educating. Having said that, it can still sit kind of at the end of the funnel and help kind of push, a sale or a commitment kind of over the line. But if we look at some of the other channels, search engine optimization kind of can span the whole funnel. The affiliates, the kind of the goal hangers of the digital world, they very much sit kind of at the bottom of the funnel where we're looking to try and kick a sale over the line and, they'll take, of course, a nice big commission. But if you start to kind of think about where I'm going with this, each channel will play a different part in that journey. The key to understanding success is understanding not only what does good look like for each channel, but what does good look like for each channel at each part of that kind of journey through or along the kind of funnel. So with that in mind, we need to start talking about, well, what are the metrics we should be using? And again, I think this is where often we can use either the wrong metrics for kind of for the wrong channels, or we end up kind of all just focusing on the one metric we feel comfortable with, and that's usually a variation on sales, kind of leads, or revenue. They're of course important metrics, but they don't necessarily sit kind of everywhere in the funnel. So let's start at the top of our traditional funnel where we're talking about awareness. Some of the goals we could be looking at, some of the KPIs, key performance indicators that we could be measuring there could absolutely be kind of reach, could be engagements, could be likes, for example, if we're talking specifically about kind of social media. And they're kind of good metrics to have. And the key there is to kind of agree those metrics, set them in place and use them consistently. Still though, some of those metrics often, particularly when you're reporting, not just to people who work within kind of digital marketing, but to those who are making decisions but aren't as familiar or as confident with the technology that you're using, can feel a little bit maybe intangible. And that's where you can still start to bring in, which tends to help with context, some kind of budgetary considerations. So for example, let's say last month we drove 50 interactions through our social media activity at our kind of awareness stage of the funnel. And those 50 interactions, based on all the kind of money we spent on social media, cost us, say, £50. So in month one, we spent £50, achieved 50 interactions. Well, that's a great place to be because we've then got a benchmark, we've then got a starting point. So we can then set our next goal for next month as let's achieve 100 interactions for that same £50 of budget. And what you start to find then by trying to relate those kind of those metrics and those KPIs to something a bit more tangible, like the financials and like budget, is it becomes easier for those who aren't necessarily working with you day to day on the digital activity to kind of understand and perceive value and give context. And then over time, you can benchmark and start to kind of drive performance forward. Then as we move down the funnel, and let's take the kind of consideration phase, we can apply exactly the same logic. And let's say at that phase, we've built a new audience and we're trying to push people to the website. We're trying to get them to land on the site, stay on the site, interact, spend a significant period of time navigating through our great content, and maybe downloading a form, downloading a PDF or a white paper, committing to kind of a next action. And we can do the same thing. We can apply kind of a value to that activity. We can look at a budget. What did it cost us last month to generate 50 kind of downloads of our, thought leadership kind of white paper? Next month, we've got the benchmark, so we can start to kind of improve on that again. And it gives us a great benchmark to work with, and again, brings a bit more understanding to those who aren't necessarily working with us on this sort of technology and strategy day in, day out. And then finally, we get ourselves to the do phase, to the action phase, the point where we're hoping that someone's going to commit to either a purchase or a commitment to work, a service, whatever it might be. And this tends to be the point in the funnel where we're all a bit more confident, and we can absolutely be tracking sales and leads, conversion rates, revenue, and tying them back to the cost of generating that revenue or lead or goal. And I think that's the point we all feel more comfortable with, but it sits very much at that point in the funnel. So that's an overview of kind of the funnel process and the journey people should take, and the idea and the concept of what does success look like? Well, it depends on where you are kind of in the funnel and the specific channel that you're using. The key 3 points I would really love you to take away from this section, are step one is define the funnel steps for your particular brand and organization. Define what they are, because they will be slightly different. And as part of that, define the channels that you're going to be using at each stage of that funnel. Then point two is set KPIs that are relevant, not just to that channel, but the point at which they are in the funnel. So whether they're at the top, at the mid, or the bottom, make sure the KPIs and goals that you're setting are relevant to that point and that channel. We don't have to go crazy. I'm talking about picking kind of maybe 1 or 2 KPIs at each stage, so we're not trying to report on too much. And then point 3, finally, report on that, report consistently, and repeat that kind of month in, month out, or week in, week out, depending on the kind of time and resource that you have. Consistency is really key, because if you don't report consistently on the same metrics, you can't understand the direction of change, whether you're moving forwards or backwards. But that's the data you need to be able to kind of make forward steps in your digital activity. And just kind of a final note point to this section is, ideally, once you're in the position where you're comfortable with the KPIs you're tracking, you're using the financials to kind of give context, you're happy that you're starting to generate kind of progress and successes at each stage of the funnel, Ideally, you would then start to attribute, and you'd attribute back whatever your successes are in terms of sales and revenue. You could attribute that back up your funnel. So actually, you're able to start adding more of a revenue-focused ROI figure to some of that top of funnel activity. It is possible to do, but realistically, attribution is a whole nother topic that we could spend many, many hours discussing and debating. So I'm not going to dive into that right now, but when you get to the stage where you have the kind of funnel set and you're using it and you're operating and you're reporting successfully, that's when you can start thinking about full attribution. And it will give you even a whole nother layer of confidence when it comes to understanding what does good look like for you. So we've covered 2 key points, and we're going to move on to kind of the third point right now. And that is no digital channel is fully effective kind of in isolation. And it's at this point I feel a little bit guilty because I feel like I've kind of misled you all to come here to kind of my talk and to listen to me speaking today, because we talked a lot about social media. And is social media really worth it? Well, I would argue that actually, no channel is kind of fully worth it when it's considered in isolation. You really need to be thinking about the kind of full marketing mix to get the very most out of your digital activity. And to try and kind of drive that point home, I want to give you a real life example, case study, if you like, from Sleeping Giant Media, how by considering all of our channels and how they work together, we've been able to generate, a great kind of business result. And bear in mind, we're a B2B business. We're a service provider. None of our customers transact online. It's all about kind of building relationships and hoping to match a need with a service. So I'm just going to kick off by just introducing you to our sister brand, or recapping on our sister brand, Giant Campus, which is all about sharing digital marketing skills and expertise. And learning from people who deliver digital marketing day in, day out. So very workshop-based, hands-on based. So Giant Campus has its own website. And a couple of years ago now, Giant Campus, as part of their content strategy, wrote a blog called Brewdog Causing a Stir. And it was a blog that was all about Brewdog at a time when they rebranded their famous Punk IPA to Pink IPA. And it's a really interesting time because it was all about understanding audience, kind of relevant to what we're talking about today. And it caused, excuse the pun, quite a stir in the industry and in the marketing world as well. So that blog was posted on the Giant Campus website. And as you would expect, you'd like to think that we know what we're doing when it comes to SEO. And that blog ranked really well on Google, so it was easy to find. But we also promoted that blog across all of our social media channels. We promoted it actively across Facebook, across Twitter, across Instagram. And the reason we did that, of course, is because we were trying to engage with a wider audience and grow the kind of audience that would see, that blog and that piece of content. Very much activity that was sitting kind of at the top of our customer funnel. Now that had the desired effect, and that blog was read and seen by a significant number of people, businesses, brands, kind of over the period that it was live. And one of the brands that saw it was a company called Speedgate. Now they found the blog via Facebook. They navigated to the Giant Campus website, and not only did they read that kind of one particular piece of content, but they actually navigated through the site, reading kind of lots more of our content that was all designed to help kind of inform, inspire, and kind of hopefully give people ideas in terms of their digital marketing activities. Spent quite a bit of time on the Giant Campus website, which was, a key part of kind of our strategy. And over time, that brand continued to return back to our website. They engaged with us via all of our kind of social media channels over a period, and we're talking about months here. And they also eventually signed up to our Giant Campus newsletter. Now, it was via that kind of sign up and that newsletter that Speedgate were eventually invited to one of our real world digital marketing seminars that we called Giant Talks. And they came in the real world to visit us at one of our venues, again, to look, to learn, to kind of meet people, to network, and to find more out about kind of digital marketing. And it was at that point they actually first met the Sleeping Giant Media team, because at this point they've really just been interacting with Giant Campus. And as I expect, you've kind of worked out by now, that initial conversation that happened in the real world at an event eventually turned into a long-term kind of successful partnership between Speedgate and Sleeping Giant Media. Now, the reason I run through this particular example is we were able to track kind of all of those touch points using a combination of our own CRM system, which we use SharpSpring, and a combination of Google Analytics, of course. If you were to look at the journey that that particular brand had been on, there were many, many touch points over many months. There were not just the few that I've kind of given here, but Speedgate interacted with us via social, via the website, via search, via email, eventually face-to-face and via phone, over a long period of time. And there were many, many interactions. But it was all of those interactions that eventually led to a great outcome. And if you step back and think about what we've been through, they weren't just digital, they weren't just social, they were online and they were offline. They were face-to-face interactions as well as social media interactions. And that's really the kind of point I want to drive home. To get that kind of outcome for us as a B2B brand, a service provider, we needed to make sure that all of our channels kind of were working together effectively, because social media on its own, without a well thought out and well planned content strategy, without a great kind of follow-up strategy, without the opportunity for a real world, interaction, wouldn't have been as effective. So really that brings me kind of to the end of today's content. We've covered the importance of needing to measure in order to manage your activity. If you're trying to answer that question, is my social media activity, is my digital marketing activity really worth it? We've got to start with measuring. But in order to measure the right things, you really need to understand the role a particular channel plays in your customer's journey. And you need to set KPIs and success metrics that are relevant, not just to the channel, but also the part that that channel's playing at the key point in the journey. And finally, please don't ignore and be blind to the fact that ultimately all channels work most effectively when they're integrated and working together. So, social media, is it really worth it? Yes.